Welcome everyone. We're just going to take a few more moments to see if we have some more attendees that will be joining us today. We want to make sure that everybody has the access to today's presentation. This will be recorded and available on the community, and I'll be putting those links into the main chat window in a few moments. And if you have further questions, you can always post them on the community link for our experts to answer. But since it's going to be recorded, let's go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and take it away, Deborah. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Deborah McGrath. I'm a Senior Technical Product Marketing Manager with ServiceNow, and I'll be hosting our webinar today. The subject is Project to Product, How to Enable Enterprise Agility. Joining me is Blair LaCour, who's a ServiceNow Advisory Solution Consultant with our IT Business Management practice. He's a subject matter expert across all our ITBM applications, and Blair will be our lead speaker, and he'll also provide a live demo. Following the demo, we'll provide you with a list of Agile resources, and we'll wrap up with a few minutes for Q&A. A quick mention about Safe Harbor. Please keep in mind that this presentation may contain forward-looking statements that reflect the current beliefs of ServiceNow, all based on current information available. And these forward-looking statements should not be relied upon in making purchasing decisions. I'd now like to introduce Blair LaCour. Blair?
Hi everyone, this is Blair LaCour. I am a solution consultant here at ServiceNow. I've been here for almost 4 years, and I specialize in IT business management. Before we go through the agenda today, I'm going to go ahead and kick off a poll to get a little bit more understanding of our audience today. So if you guys could go ahead and answer 2 questions that I've asked. One is just, what's your exposure with ServiceNow? None, never had any. Maybe the second one, maybe your company is using ServiceNow, but you've only had exposure as just somebody who's requesting things from the help desk. And the third one is, maybe you've had a little bit more exposure to ServiceNow, but not ITBM. So maybe you're working within HR, service management, or operations. And then finally, if you have exposure within ITBM. And then the next set of questions, if you have had exposure within ServiceNow, ITBM, then what areas have you seen? So looks like we've got some results that have come in, still calculating. So let's go ahead and look at those poll results. And it looks like the audience today, everybody does have some ServiceNow experience. Some people are just help desk maybe, and then other people have been exposed to specific applications. And then when we get into specifically what have you used around IT business management, and it looks like we have some folks that have none, but we can see that there's been a lot of exposure across all of the areas within IT business management, ideation through demand management, portfolio and project execution, as well as Scrum, SAFe, and application portfolio management. So it's great to get a background of the folks that are here today. One more poll will be coming in a few moments, so be ready to answer those poll questions. The agenda that we have today, first thing I'm going to talk about is our strategic demand versus our ongoing demand. This constant tension that we have between run the business and change the business. Then we're going to talk about how can we evolve from a project-based methodology towards a product-based methodology, and how can these things work together. Then we're going to compare and contrast the traditional waterfall methodology with Agile. Then we're going to talk about how these things can work together and how we can enable enterprise agility. For the context of the demo, I'm going to be demoing 3 modes of Agile. We'll be looking at a pure Scrum-based, team-based Agile. Then we'll be looking at waterfall. And then finally, we'll look at scaled Agile framework. So let me go ahead and start to progress into the presentation here. So at the top, we see that we have our strategic planning. This is where we determine where we're going to invest. At the bottom, these are the things that are just ongoing activity, our keep the lights on type of work. Along the top, with those strategic initiatives, we're going to be deciding what new products are we going to roll out. How are we going to improve positioning that we have against our competitors, or what new technologies will we introduce through digital transformation? How can we create great experiences, whether that be for our customers or internally for our own employees? And then finally, we need analytics to help drive these strategic initiatives. And then along the bottom, we see all of the keep the lights on activity that we need to do just to keep things running. So enhancement requests, our problems and our changes, just maintaining current state, managing our CMDB and the services associated with them, and then also how can we rationalize our business applications? How can we rationalize the business services that are supporting our organization? So I'm going to go ahead and launch into poll number 2 here. And here I'm trying to get an understanding individually, the folks that are on this webinar. We're going to see the same question in 2 ways. The first one is saying, you personally, what methodologies are you working with? And then beyond that, what methodologies is your company or your organization working with as well? So I'll just give a few moments here. Okay, let's go ahead. This time I'll share the results. So when I'm talking, you can hear the results of the poll that I just sent out. So we can see that the vast majority individually, and this is really interesting because if we look at the individuals, everybody's using all methodologies. No one selected other. So you're using everything. And then from an organization perspective, similar. Again, we're using, everybody's using waterfall at some level. Most people are using a team-based Scrum approach. Almost half are using Kanban, just a visual representation of my process. And then 60% are rolling out scaled Agile framework, which is very interesting. And then of course our operational processes, those aren't going to go away. So we've got many people that are still working on the run the business activities as well. So there we see our polling results. And now I just want to show that the connection between the strategic work that we're trying to do at the bottom and the ongoing work that we're doing at the bottom, there we have multiple solutions at the top where we're doing our strategic planning. We have multiple solutions at the bottom where we're doing our operational work. So this further exacerbates that tension between run the business and change the business. And the analysts tell us this as well. So we can see that on average, we're spending less than a third on transforming the business, and most of it on run the business. And we get that information from Gartner. From McKinsey, we can see that only 30% of our efforts are being invested to try and differentiate ourselves from our competition. And then finally, the PMI Institute in the far right here tells us we're wasting $1 million every 20 seconds. And then we also see that about 10% of our spend is being wasted due to poor performance of our delivery and of our execution. So now let's talk about how we can evolve from a project-based methodology to enable that enterprise agility. So on the bottom left here, we have the more traditional methodologies. It's very siloed, structured. Typically, the ITPMO or the EPMO operate through linear planning. The structure is very strong, but it's often very slow moving. And then when we start to talk about more of an agile delivery, we now have a network of teams and a product-based approach where we're now bringing the work to the teams rather than bringing the teams to the work. And the value management office or the strategic planning office now can leverage this team-based solution to have a more continual planning, with more feedback, with more understanding. We can be more agile and react to those changes based on that more feedback that we get from that team-based solution. And now I just want to talk about really ServiceNow is the only vendor that can manage all of these things in one place. So if we think about it, and I think the audience today said everybody has some level of ServiceNow exposure, every end user has the ability to participate and collaborate. That could be something that's more operational, more run the business. It could be that next new great idea through innovation management, but everybody can participate and be part of this process. And regardless if it's a new story or operational, we have the ability to have both run the business and change the business in one place, as well as multiple methodologies. And because we can manage all these things in one place, through continuous planning, we can help make sure that we're working on the right things, getting that feedback. So now let's take a quick look back. Let's go ahead and talk about the different methodologies and how they evolved. We'll start with waterfall. I think we're all familiar with the classic waterfall work breakdown structure, a sequential linear process of project management. The pros are it's easy to agree on scope up front. It's easy to lay out and plan, but then we realize once we get into delivery, once we get into execution, there can be a long time to value. Because of this long feedback loop, the customer rarely gets what they want. And there's very little communication between the siloed teams, and system integration can be extremely challenging. So that's the traditional waterfall methodology. Now let's talk about Agile. Agile is an incremental methodology. It was initially developed for software development, but it's been widely adopted in many areas of all businesses. And really the mantra here is it's a team-based approach. So we now have teams that are small, and they're working in iterations that can turn over quickly, typically 2 to 4 weeks. And the pros of this is that scope can be pivoted based on customer needs and feedback. Time to value is extremely fast. Customer is part of the team, so we're always, as we finish each iteration, we're getting feedback from the end user. We don't need to wait for the next stage gate. We can always get an understanding of how the project is evolving, how the requirements are evolving. The cons can be that it's hard to establish and companies to adopt. It can take time for companies to establish this cadence, and it often requires a culture shift. And I'd argue that a lot of these things are happening. They're happening in all of our organizations. Agile is popping up everywhere, and I no longer see adoption as big of a challenge as I did in years past. Teams are adopting Agile. And now the question is, how can we all work together? How can we bring Agile to that waterfall methodology? Or potentially, how could we scale Agile? So let's compare and contrast that feedback. So you can see here with the traditional waterfall project, I have my stage gates. One moves to the next. And then below you can see, compared to Scrum Agile, we're iterating. So every 2 weeks, every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the length of your iterations, we're going to get that feedback. So this gives more alignment with the teams that are doing that development, that are doing that work with their end users, with their customers that they're trying to deliver for, to get that minimal viable product and to keep it moving forward. Now I'm going to compare and contrast traditional delivery and governance model to really how can we become an agile enterprise. So along the left here, we see some of the traditional linear things that we're familiar with within portfolio management. The demand comes in, we go through a prioritization, we assign, we plan, we go to the next process and the next process in a very linear way. And we're constantly looking at this in terms of scope, people, and money, the proverbial triangle, and then ultimately we go into production, and then the loop continues. And you'll notice that within this methodology, we do have pockets of Agile. So this could be the first step where we see that team-based approach. We see specific teams starting to use Agile in a way that worked for them. So the next slide is going to talk about enterprise agility. It certainly includes the things that we're talking about today, hybrid methodology, waterfall, Scrum, scaled Agile framework. But enterprise agility is actually even going further beyond those methodologies. So what I'm going to start to talk about here are all the other activities that we can be doing on the ServiceNow platform. You know, wouldn't it be great if all of our ideas came in at the same time, with the same cadence, with the exact same schedule? That's not really the way it works. It happens in waves. So everybody within ServiceNow, as mentioned, has the ability to participate in this innovation, to bring in those new things that we want to do, and we have a way to bring in the operational work in one place. In terms of planning, we can now move on to not just funding portfolios, but also funding the concept of a strategy. So in ServiceNow, we have investment funding, which can work hand in hand with portfolio management, but portfolio management tends to plan on an annual basis. Investment funding can work as incremental as a quarter. So we now have the ability to not just fund a project or not just fund a demand or a portfolio, but we have the ability to fund a product. We have the ability to fund a value stream. And then this work can then move into the various approaches in terms of delivery, whether that be waterfall, whether that be project. It's also worth noting that once we complete a project, we have the ability to track that benefit, to track that outcome that we said we were going to do. So when we said we were going to increase revenue, when we said we were going to lower costs, we have the ability to continue to measure that once our solution goes live. We also have a DevOps solution where we have the ability to automate the change process. Our DevOps solution does integrate with a number of different tools, things like Git, GitHub, Jenkins, and a number of different developer solutions to automate that process, yet we have the ability at ServiceNow to audit that, track that change, and automatically approve it based on the DevOps process. Moving on to the left here, we're now talking about all the things that we do within the platform itself. So we're really starting to talk about the ability for us to manage services, to have that operational feedback loop that is constantly being churned, groomed, and ensuring that we're working on the right things. So that's a bit of a discussion about stepping just beyond methodologies of waterfall, Scrum, or scaled Agile framework and looking about how the ServiceNow platform can help us move towards enterprise agility. And then now I'm just going to enumerate the three things that we're going to go through today in terms of a demonstration. So the first mode of Agile is Scrum. So this is our product-based approach. It's a team-based approach, and Scrum works very well on its own for that individual team. They get to operate the way they like, but each team is going to operate a little bit differently. And Scrum has some limitations built into it by design. An iteration knows a start date, it knows an end date, but it knows no concept of time or money. So given that Scrum has been very successful at the team level, as we need to scale this, we can go in a couple different directions. The first direction would be to bring Scrum into the more traditional waterfall project. So in the picture here along the top, I can see the stage gates coming from my waterfall project, but below you can see that we've embedded Scrum right inside that waterfall project. So this really gives us the best of both worlds. The teams can operate the way that they're used to operating. They don't need to compromise. And the folks that are used to the project management, more traditional project management, can operate the way they'd like to as well, with things like CapEx, OpEx, time management, and project controls and status, and have alignment within that portfolio. So that would be the more, in terms of taking Scrum and finding ways to scale it, there's the hybrid approach, and then the Agile answer to scaling Scrum is scaled Agile framework. And then so essentially within Scaled Agile Framework, at the bottom level, we'll have that same team-based approach, but now our stories are being composed of as a part of a feature, and our features are a part of an epic, and we can see these 3 levels within Scaled Agile Framework. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the demo. And before I get into Scrum proper, I wanted to show a platform feature that you can use in any list in ServiceNow. Ultimately, when we get to sprint execution, we'll see that classic Kanban board, but what I wanted everybody to realize is that we also have the ability to turn any process in ServiceNow into that visual Kanban board experience. So anytime I'm in a list view here in ServiceNow, I can do some powerful things. I'm going to point out some platform features, and notice that I'm in a list of incidents. I'm not in a list of stories here. So the first thing I want to do is only see the incidents that are associated with the service desk. So let's say that I'm on the service desk team. I'm going to go ahead and click Show Matching. And from here, you can see that I've actually started to refine a list along the top here, and the ServiceNow Query Builder is starting to build out that report for me. So here you can see I'm filtered on the service desk. This is something that I can save and share with additional people. This is also something that I can take and drag off to the left if I want to access this at a different time. And the next thing I wanted to show, when we click on the headers along the top in the list views, we get some different options as well. So I'm going to go ahead and focus on the state field here, and I'm going to right click and then say Show Visual Task Board. So I'm not in Agile yet. There's a tendency for people to see Kanban or visual task boards and assume that they're executing in Agile. This is still just a list of incidents the way that it was before, but now I can experience it in this visual way. In terms of collaboration, I can see who's working on what by filtering at the top. I can also use this to drive assignment. And then if we move the incident from one state to the next, we're actually moving it along in the process. I can go ahead and drill in on one of the incident records here. You can see that it's the same incident process that it was before. So some other platform features I'd like to point out, visual task boards. When I click on the eye here, this too is something that I can favorite. So if we pay attention to the left nav on the left here, you'll see that I can shortcut these visual task boards, so I can just jump right into this experience. You can see that it was filtered down, that argument that I'd set up. This visual task board brought in that argument with me. We can have board participants, and then also anybody who's assigned will automatically show along the top. We can turn on tagging, and this behaves the same way that participants do, where we can drag and drop if we want to tag something a certain way. And we also have the ability to filter and rename these tags as well. So there's a quick preview just of visual task boards in general. I'm now going to switch over to the role of a product owner. So let me move over to be a lead. And before we get into our backlog planning and our grooming and our sprint planning, I wanted to show that this is a product-based solution. So there is a product taxonomy behind each of these stories in Agile 2.0. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at a list of my products here, and we'll focus on the CRM portal product. And then for the CRM portal, I can see the releases that it is currently a part of, the themes that it's supporting, the epics, all the stories that are assigned to this product. And then ultimately, one of the most important things here is I can see the team that is associated with this product. So when I drill into the CRM engineering team, here I can see each of the members that are part of this team. And I also have the ability to establish the velocity that we're expecting for this team as well, or how many points do we expect to be able to accomplish on an iteration by iteration basis. So when we do get into sprint planning and sprint execution, you'll see where that capacity is coming from. So let's go ahead and jump into the Agile board. And the first thing that we'll take a look at here is the backlog. And right now, this is driven by the drop-down that I see on the top left here. Right now, we're looking at all stories. The KPI cards that we see here, these are filterable. So maybe I just want to see the stories with no points, or maybe I want to see the stories with no acceptance criteria. You can also filter by our epics on the left. In terms of creating a story, just get a little pop-up here, and you can see all the fields that you would expect within Scrum Agile. So what themes am I a part of? The epics, points, product relationship, release scheduling, the assigned team, specific assigned to. For the hybrid project, we'll start to see stories be part of a project, and we'll start to see them be part of an Agile phase. I'll just go ahead and create a story there, and it goes into the backlog. Now, it's worth noting that things could become a story in a lot of different ways. We may just come in and create stories. We may have an incident that comes in that we realize that it's not an incident, it's working as designed. That goes to the backlog of that product owner and could become a story. But ultimately, we're in this backlog here. We can drag and drop records up in terms of our global ranking. We can also drag and drop multiple records up and down in terms of their ranking. While we have multiple records selected, you can see that when I click on the more or ellipses here, I can update multiple fields at the same time. And then now let's talk a little bit more about the personal backlog that I see on the top left here. So right now, we're looking at all stories. Maybe I wanted to see the products or stories that the CRM portal is working on, the CRM portal team is working on. So here I can filter down just to see the products that are, the stories that are associated with the CRM portal. Maybe I want to see the employee performance backlog. And then you'll notice something that's going on here. The triage board right now has nothing associated with it. When I move back to the all stories backlog, you'll see that the triage board now has things associated with it. So I'm going to drill into the backlog definition in a moment, but before we do that, let's just take a look at the triage board. So here I can see any non-story record in ServiceNow and bring it into the same Agile backlog. So what we've seen with a lot of our customers over the years is an incident comes in, that gets resolved immediately. Comes in again, you have your problem, your change, and so forth, maybe a defect. This can then go over to some other third-party Agile solution where it is then worked, and then at some point we've got to come back to ServiceNow and let us know that we've addressed that. So here we can short-circuit that loop, and we can do it all directly here in ServiceNow in the unified backlog. So let's say I want to take a look at defects that have come into the all stories backlog. So here I'm looking at a list of defects. So wrong price is fetched during repricing. I'm going to go ahead and add that to the backlog. And then when I return to the backlog, I can see that defect is now at the bottom of my same backlog where I'm looking at my stories. And you may have noticed this earlier. You can see that the unique key is a little bit different. I can see this is a defect. We can see that the icon that we're using is different. And then when I drill into this defect, we'll see that we haven't changed that defect process at all. So here is my defect process right now, and we've just simply married it with a story. And before we move into sprint planning and sprint tracking, let's take a look at how the backlog is working here. So I'm going to go ahead and click the pencil, and I can now go ahead and edit this backlog. And you can see the exact same query engine that I was showing on, the exact same query engine that I was using on that initial list of incidents. This is that exact same query engine. So we have the ability to filter off any field that's part of the story. So by default, to be in the all stories backlog, you need to be active and you don't need to be in a sprint. The other backlogs that we were looking at had other filters on them, like what product am I in or what team am I in? So now I am looking at the CRM portals backlog. I could go ahead and do a save of this, share this with additional people so they can log in, see that drop down the drop down of personal backlogs has been shared with them. Not every user has to go in here and do this. We also have the ability to share them. And then when I come to the bottom, those query definitions that we saw, that list of incidents, defects, operational demand, again, is just a collection of queries that we have associated to this backlog. So from this view in the backlog view, our view is going to be driven chiefly by the backlog filter that we have. As we move into sprint planning, we've now moved on to that team-based approach. So if I move over to the CRM engineering team, I can see all the iterations that are lined up here, sprint 5, 6, 7, and 8. We noticed when I was filtering on the CRM backlog, we saw the same two stories here. And to create a new sprint or a new iteration, just need to click this create button. You can see there's a convention in place. It will take that literal string, and then the last iteration was 8. I now have iteration 9. The start date and end date are looking at the same duration from the previous iteration or previous sprint and using that same iteration length. And the capacity that I spoke about, or the velocity that we saw defined in the team record, is here. You'll notice that's an editable field. That's in case you might have shorter week, or maybe we've got the dynamics of the team different from one iteration to the next, so we can manipulate that capacity on an iteration by iteration basis. And then in terms of planning out my iterations, here I can see I have 32 points and I only have 30 points of capacity. And we're currently at 106%. So we can go ahead and just move something out into one of the subsequent iterations. And now I can see that I'm below velocity that I'd like to be within. All of the same features that we saw on the backlog persist here. So the ability to update multiple records, the ability to drag and drop multiple records at the same time is still here. Again, it's just now that we're focused on the team that we're working with and the iterations that they're planning. And finally, I'm going to move over to sprint tracking, where we'll see, once again, Kanban board now in sprint execution. So just like we saw in the list of incidents, here I can use this to understand who's working on what. Again, I can move my stories from one phase to the next. Let me go ahead and just show you that. I'm going to remove the acceptance criteria that was here for this story. You know, when we are in these visual task boards, we're still enforcing the same edit check that we would before. So you could see that I got sent right back to draft because I did not have that required field. So here we're looking at Scrum on the team-based level. I now am going to pivot over to Scrum at the program level. So on the top left of the board here, you can see there's a team view. And this is essentially the view that we were just in at the team approach here. So the backlog, sprint planning, and sprint tracking. But when I move over to the program level, Now I have an aggregated way to see how the teams are working together. So along the left, I can see all the teams that are a part of this Scrum program. I can see the dependencies that I have from one iteration to the next. So if I move a story that would violate one of the dependencies, we'll see that dependency starts to turn red for me. The other thing that we're doing is calculating, same way that we were at the team level, we're continuing to calculate what this is doing to our capacity, what this is doing to our team's ability to execute these stories in this iteration. So we've just taken a look at mode 1 of Agile, or what I refer to as mode 1 in my PowerPoint. We saw pure Scrum. We saw a ability to aggregate this at the program level. Let's now pivot over to the hybrid approach. We go ahead and switch personas to Paul Martin. So I can see here that I'm logged on as Paul Martin. He's a project manager. Here I am in the project workspace. Each of these cards is a project that I'm assigned. I can see high-level information, overall status, percentage complete. These cards are configurable in that if we wanted to express different metadata, those are options for us to configure as well. I'm going to go ahead and drill into the project HR service management. And the way that we navigate a project are the tabs that I see along the top here. So analytics is the dashboard that we see right below. Details is going to be that form view with all the metadata driving my process forward. Planning will be my work breakdown structure. Resources is where we have formal resource management. So normally not something that you would want to use on a Scrum-based solution. So this is a way that we can use them together. And then financials, again, Scrum does not really have a way to deal with things like CapEx, OpEx, and the complexities of financials that we can get to here in the project. And then finally, a traditional status report that this will be the project status report that everyone sees no matter what their context is. So in this status report, we're automatically aggregating header information along the top, executive summary, with some subjective feedback. We can't hide from the actuals. Planned and actual costs, planned and actual resource information. We can see KPIs from the most recent status report, basically the one that we're in. And then further below, we can see trending information of these statuses over time. We have the ability to pull in any other artifact of the project itself. So issues, risks, scope changes, action items, milestones from the project plan, and so forth. So let's go ahead and just take a cursory view of some of the components of the project. It's worth noting that the drop-down that I see here on the left, it's the same list of cards that I saw at the beginning. And that same list of cards that I saw at the beginning was coming and finding the projects that I'm assigned. So this is bringing the work to the people, not making me go do a search for my project. The analytics that we see here, this is a configurable dashboard. You're looking at one of the out-of-the-box dashboards within the project management analytics. But you'll see here that we're really just leveraging platform features that we already have. The details is going to be, again, that form view, the overall process of where we're at. Here I can see my assignment to a portfolio program. Because this is a hybrid project, we have the concept of a product. That same taxonomy we were just looking at is now associated with the waterfall project. Are we running the business or changing the business? So really just wanted to show you the form view that you would use for decision-making, routing, aggregating, and approval in a traditional waterfall process. And then further below, we can see some of the other traditional processes you would expect in a project, like my issues, my risks, my scope changes, and so forth. And then from here, though, you can see that I'll point out I have the PMBOK project change request, and I also have an ITIL change request. So this is a real great example of how in ServiceNow, where when we say we're on one database, when we say we're on one platform, how we can remove friction from these processes. So when I click new here, you'll see that I'm routed to the normal change process that I'm already familiar with. So let's move on to details, from details on to project execution. And it's here where we'll see that traditional waterfall project, right? So I can see I have my tasks that break down into subordinate tasks, where we have assignment. I can see the dependencies. For scheduling enthusiasts out there, I'll point out that we do have all 4 dependency types. Similar to Microsoft Project, we do support lead and lag. And then right in the middle of this project, I can see that I have some Agile phases embedded. So this is the one place where waterfall and project get along. That concept of a date in an iteration marries up perfectly to be a task and a project plan. So for the folks that are working waterfall up here, all they know is that this is a start date, and they know that it's an end date. They don't need to be concerned about how that team is working. And it's worth noting, I also have another Agile phase in this project plan, but it's an external dependency. So we see that gray color there. You'll see one of the end user settings is I can hide external dependencies. So in this project, I'm actually looking at 2 different iterations from 2 different teams. It's also worth noting that I can create as many Agile phases as I want here. And the importance of that to me is that as you move forward in your Agile journey, as each organization is moving forward, we're going to have some teams that are highly orthodox. They do stand-ups. They're familiar with the Fibonacci series, and they've got their culture and rituals down. And then in that same organization, you'll have a team that says, let's try Agile this week with no training. So you're looking at a way that we can isolate these teams. They can both execute in Agile in their way, and neither team needs to compromise. They can all move forward on that Agile journey together. So within this work breakdown structure here, I'm not really seeing a great view of the stories. Let's pivot over to, and right now I'm in the planning console. Let me pivot over to the project workbench. And then here we're looking at the exact same work breakdown structure that we saw before. Here are my summary level tasks. When I click on initiating, I see project tasks, start date, end date, percentage complete, what you would expect. When I click on development though, now I'm seeing stories that are part of a sprint that have points. And it's from here that I can now start to marry together that visual task board concept. Same thing that we saw in the incident, same thing that we saw when we were in Scrum execution. Now you can see how I can use this visual collaborative experience, whether it's traditional, so I can go back to my waterfall tasks, I can move over to the development task, where here I'm looking exclusively at stories. And this is where it becomes a design decision for our customers. We can have our Agile teams that never see more than the execution that they're in, the iteration that they're in, or the sprint that they're in. They don't need to be concerned with formal resource management, formal financial management, although there are other parties that will have a great concern for those. At the same time, everybody's more than welcome to use both parts of both methodologies, but the thing is that we don't need to force teams to compromise to use solutions that don't make sense for them. And before I leave the project, I'll just do a quick highlight of resource management and financial management. So here I'm looking at formal resource management. Again, this is something that by default, Scrum would not want. Scrum doesn't want to work in hours. It wants to work in points. It wants to know how quickly can we get something turned around within my iteration. So there could be a need, though, where I have that big capital project where I need to do formal resource management, and the Scrum team can be embedded, as we just saw. Each of the lines that I see here is a different resource plan. We can have them requested to specific teams. We can build them out in roles or individual people. The states that I see here, you're really looking at the resource process itself. It comes in initially and it's planned. Then the resource manager starts to confirm or soft book before he or she finally allocates. And then here you can see actuals coming back in. If I want to be able to see as I plan these out, now these guys are all in flight and allocated, but if I ever wanted to see the availability within a given team or within a given request, I can turn on the resource finder, and you'll see here I'm looking at the big data team. Here I'm looking at the HR specialist. And this is a specific person, so we'll just see her specific record. But however I've set up my resource plan, whether they be on role, skill, team, further below, I can see what their availability is and the likelihood of me being able to staff them onto this project. So that is a very cursory review of resource management. Also just wanted to show you a cursory review of finances as well. Again, not something by default that Agile or Scrum would care about, but these are the things that are going to be of great importance on those big capital projects. So here you can see that we have the ability to capture costs, both in terms of CapEx and OpEx, but then also break down by specific cost types as well. We can look at this in terms of the year, quarter, or down to a fiscal period, and I can see my planned, actual, and variant. So that closes out mode 2, where we saw a waterfall project and how we could embed Scrum into it. That's going the more traditional portfolio approach in terms of ways that we can scale Agile. Now let's take a look at how we can use Scaled Agile Framework, which is one of Agile's answer to scaling Agile. And I'm going to start off on the scaledagileFrameworks.com website. If you're not familiar with this, this is one of the best places to go to see any information about Scaled Agile Framework. All of these things are drillable. If I want to learn more about what is an epic, what exactly is a feature, what is a story, these are all drillable. We have two types of Scaled Agile Framework at ServiceNow. We have Essential SAFe as well as Portfolio SAFe. So at Essential SAFe, at the very bottom here, you can see that we have the same team-based solution, essentially Scrum. And here you can see that we're working in program increments, and a program increment is typically 5 two-week sprints. So the lines that I see here are very deliberate. And you can also see that my stories are becoming part of features that are more at the Agile release train level. So at the Agile release train, or my team of teams, I now have multiple teams working on a feature that decompose into those stories. So Essential SAFe has the Agile release train level as well as the team level. When we come over to Portfolio SAFe, you'll see that we've added Portfolio to the top. So there's Portfolio, Essential, and then our team-based solution at the bottom. With the entrance of Portfolio, we now have epics that break down into features, and those epics break down into stories. So what this is doing is giving stakeholders and owners something more meaningful as we start to aggregate to tangible features inside of an epic. These are things that our end users, that our customers can relate to. A lot of the times there's a difficulty and transparency on what Agile teams are doing. This is a way to give visibility to personas at all levels. And then the other thing that should jump out as to here, one of the dramatic differences between Scrum and Scaled Agile Framework is that all of my teams have identical iterations and identical cadences. So let's jump over into ServiceNow and take a look at Scaled Agile Framework. And let me go ahead and jump on to the SAFe board. I'm going to start off by, here you can see our 3 levels. We've got the portfolio level, as well as the Agile release train level, and the team level. I'm going to start off on the Agile release train level. And here we get that visualization. You know, the The difference between Scaled Agile Framework and that Scrum view that we were looking at, that Scrum program board that we were looking at, is here you can see that all the iterations are lined up. So where Scrum tends to let each team do the things they want to do, within Scaled Agile Framework, we're going to ensure that every team has the exact same cadence on all of their iterations. On the left here, I can see the teams that are part of this Agile release train. And a similar look and feel that we had in the program board, here I can see the dependencies between projects. I have the ability to drag and drop them from one sprint to the next. I also have the ability to drop them in a different team. That happens that it will go unassigned, and that team then can assign the best fit. So we see that we can observe the dependencies between the stories. On the top left here, we can toggle back and forth between both stories and features. So as I click on the features toggle, now I can see the actual features and how they relate together. And that's based off of the dependencies that we see in the story. Finally, I'll come back to the Stories tab. On the hamburger on the right here, I can see a list of stories in my backlog by feature, and I can then drag and drop them, assign them to a specific iteration or a specific team. So this is at the Agile release train level. So this is that team of teams that we're seeing. Let's go ahead and take a look at the portfolio level. And then here, this is the same portfolio, this list of dropdowns that I see here. These are the same portfolios that we're using in PPM. So from a Scaled Agile Framework perspective, these are all epics, and they're all moving through the funnel. And the same functionality exists as before. I can drag and drop, see who's working on what. Let's go ahead and jump into the ad platform that Adela is working on. And here is my epic form. You can see that we have the components of weighted shortest job first. And when I enter this information, it's giving me a WSJF score above. And then also further below, I can see that the epic that I'm in relates to and decomposes into features. So the features are those things that we're going to be looking at that Agile release train level that my team of teams works on. But here I can start to see that connection as you go through PI planning, your program increment planning. Once things move through the funnel, I can see clear filters. Once they arrive at the backlog, we are then presented in our backlog here where I now see my epics, and you can see that ideally we'd like to have this sorted by our weighted shortest job first, but you can see that we can drag and drop and change the ranking of these epics the same way that we could drag and drop and change the ranking of our stories in our Scrum backlog. So I'm now going to drill down to that Agile release train level. We'll move over to the board view here. So now I'm seeing features as they grow up, as they develop and move closer to the backlog. Again, let's filter off of specific users here. And we'll take a look. These are the same two features that we saw in the epic at the portfolio level. And then when I drill in, you can see that we also have WSJF or weighted shortest job first at the feature level. Then we can also see how the feature decomposes into different stories. And once again, as we move into the backlog, we're then presented into backlog planning, where again, the same way that we could, when we were at the Scrum level, we were planning out sprints or iterations and dragging stories in and out. So here I have a program increment, and I can rank and bring my features in and out. In terms of the cadence and the synchronization that I pointed out when we were at the Agile release train board or the big room planning board at the art level, when I go to create an increment, this is how we do it. So by me just giving this a name, this program increment a name, any team that's in this Agile release train will have identical sprint lengths and an identical number of sprints. So by default, the best practice is 2 week, 2 5-week, 2 week, 5 2-week sprints. There we go. That of course is could vary and can be changed by the end user. And then finally, we'll arrive at the big room planning board, which is where I started off the demonstration for Agile, Scaled Agile Framework, because I think really this gives us a visualization of exactly what SAFe is. You know, the concept of all these teams working together, synchronized, having their iterations, understanding the dependency of stories between teams and between iterations. And then I'm not going to repeat the Scrum-based demonstration that I did, but when we move down to the team level, we'll see a similar look and feel here. Here I can see all the teams. And you can see that there is a convention in place. Again, the iterations that were lined up happened when I created that program increment, and the teams don't have that same flexibility that they would in Scrum. Here we're going to be synchronized and through each iteration giving feedback. And that concludes the demo portion. I'm just going to come back to slide mode here as we wrap things up. And really just to close on how I think that IT business management can help enable enterprise agility. Again, the ability for us to have all these different workflows, all these different work streams in one place gives us the ability to align IT and make sure that we're working on the right initiatives, that we're creating value. Because we're all in one place, we have the ability to manage uncertainty and adaptive planning, the flexibility to use all of these different methodologies, the ability to allow people to work the way they want to work, allow us to bring the work to people and not make teams compromise, and the ability to do this on one platform. And Deborah, I'm going to go ahead and start to go towards the resources slide if you wanted to help with any closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Blair. That was a really great presentation and a wonderful demo. And it was a really thought-provoking look at the benefits of moving from traditional project management toward the different Agile methodologies. And as Blair said, in our last few minutes, I'd like to point out our resource list just for some additional information on ServiceNow Agile Solution. It includes links to an overview of the ServiceNow Agile Management Solution, our Agile Management Solutions datasheet, and a brief video introducing the ServiceNow Agile 2.0 application. And at the bottom, we've also provided a link to our community site where you can find more information and collaborate with others on ServiceNow Agile 2.0 and other ITBM solutions. And with that, I'd like to turn to our Q&A. We've just got a couple minutes. Blair, some of the questions had been posted. I took a stab at answering some, but I did want to follow up with one in particular. A question came in: how do you track incident back to a story? And asking more from a communications perspective. So once the stories are complete, they'd like to be able to communicate back to the incident. And I mentioned how when we add an incident to the unified backlog, it automatically creates a story. And then that story could then be shown or made available, say, on the incident form by adding the stories related list. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts on, on expanding on that and communicating that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, first and foremost, we bring these two processes together, and that's a pretty big accomplishment that we can do that. But then really what we get into are design decisions. So now what's the behavior of an incident when that story closes? Is one leading the other at various stages of the process? And really I would consider all these things. Another thing that came up was notification. So we could then go back to the incident and notify people when that story closes. All of these things would be considered standard configuration during an implementation. So things like who gets what notification when, what information is in the email. So all those things are very, very simple configurations for us, really just leveraging the platform features that are already available.
Awesome. We've got about 1 minute left, but there was another question that came in early on. I answered a bit just saying we integrate, but the question was, can code check-ins, checkout, and deployment happen for other technology projects? For example, Azure DevOps. And I let them know that we seamlessly integrate, through with Agile and our DevOps solution. I'm just wondering if you had anything to add along those lines.
I would really just couch it to DevOps. What's worth noting is that DevOps is not leveraging just one or two. I mentioned GitHubs and Jenkins. We just mentioned Azure. On the ServiceNow store, we are releasing spokes that Integration Hub leverages. We're releasing these on a monthly basis. So where you used to be somewhat dependent on ServiceNow to go through upgrades, these spokes are bringing in new integrations to a wide array of solutions. So Azure is one of them, and I believe it is out there now. In terms of Agile and DevOps, delivery is wherever we're doing the work. It could be a project task. It could be an Agile story. It could be an Agile story in Jira, by the way. Then the baton gets passed to DevOps, and that's where all the check-in, check-out is happening. That's where all the automated build processes and automated changes are happening in the DevOps side.
Awesome. Thank you, Blair. Appreciate that. I wish we had more time for questions, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. In closing, I'd like to remind everyone that you'll be able to access this webinar and all Now Community webinars on demand at community.servicenow.com. While you're there, please subscribe to our IT Business Management Forum on the Now Community, where you'll see our featured ITBM content, as well as links to upcoming webinars, including a repeat of today's topic every Wednesday in March. You'll also have access to our Last Thursdays with ITBM webinar series. On the last Thursday of every month, we'll be presenting a live ITBM webinar and demo. And we encourage you to register for our next one, which is an Orlando overview webinar, scheduled for Thursday, March 26th, when we'll present and demo what's new in ITBM in the new ServiceNow Orlando release. Until then, thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.